We don't like to talk about it, but we must. The spiritual, emotional, and physical well-being of our kids hangs in the balance. That's why we need to be thinking about and strategizing on how to best push back and minister to kids in the midst of the growing epidemic of teen suicide. What are the signs? What are the myths? How can youth workers and parents intervene in a moment of crisis? Join us for a practical and hope-filled conversation with Dr. Marv Penner about teens and suicide on this episode of Youth Culture Matters.
From the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding, this is Youth Culture Matters. If you're a parent, youth worker, educator, counselor, grandparent, or anyone else who cares about kids, we're glad you've joined us for this practical, informative, and hope-filled podcast. This is a place where together we talk and think Christianly about the rapidly changing world of today's children, teens, and young adults.
Welcome to this episode of Youth Culture Matters. Walt, good to be here with you. I'm excited for this new podcast that we've launched 50 episodes in. How are you feeling about it?
I'm good. Your name, please?
Touche.
Yeah. Jason Socinick.
We're still getting to know each
That's
other.
Awesome.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I have fun doing this with you. What was the question? I was too busy thinking of a snarky comment.
Yeah, I was, but honestly, I just wanted to get us going because I'm excited for the conversation that's needing to happen today on today's podcast.
Yeah.
Excited might not be the right word, but it's a needed conversation.
Right. Needed, excited, sobering. We're going to talk about teens and suicide. We're going to have Marv Penner on. Marv's been counseling teenagers for decades and has some great wisdom and does some wonderful training with folks on his own and alongside us here at CPYU, equipping youth workers and parents to understand some of these difficult realities. Jason, I'm going to ask you this. It seems like, I read the paper every day, and it seems like here in our paper in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, we're seeing just about every week there's at least one, maybe more, deaths to drug overdose, the opioid crisis. And not as much as that, we're seeing suicides, young people who are taking their lives. And what's happening in the Northwest? I mean, is the trend, your perception, the trend that we see here is the trend that we see? Yeah. It's
trending upwards. I see this dynamic playing out in multiple ways across the country, but it's just as real here in the Northwest as it is anywhere else.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of different reasons. I'm sure we'll talk about them today, but it is incredibly sobering. I think that's the word that you used. We're in a day and age where it's not surprising, but I want to be surprised, but I'm not, and it's actually really sad. Some of the reasons that you come to find out. And
as you listen to youth workers and you hear the stories, this is not something that's happening out there in the world. It's happening everywhere. Depression and suicide among teenagers and even among adults, they are no respecter of persons. And whether you are a person of faith or not, and yet we know that we need to do a better job of tracking with kids, of watching kids, of equipping kids to understand the hope of the gospel so that when they hit the rough spots in life, they're able to, as many of our friends say, preach the gospel to themselves. I think that's something we have failed miserably at as adults and as youth workers, and really work to help them see how to get through the rough spots of life with the hope of the gospel. But at the same time, we need to understand this. Hey, can I pulled up some stats, and I know we're going to talk about statistics a little bit later with Marv, but let me just read a couple of things here just to set the tone, frame the conversation. Then we'll take a break and come back and jump into this with Marv. But here are some stats that I pulled off, and we'll actually include some links to these things as well on the podcast page. Suicide rates for adolescent boys and girls have been steadily rising over the course of the last 10 years since 2007. This comes from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, who have been tracking these things for a long time. The suicide rate for girls ages 15 to 19 has doubled between 2007 to 2015. That was the last date for stats to be accumulated. I'm sure we'll hear more soon. It's reached its highest point in 2015. It reached its highest point in 40 years. The rate for boys ages 15 to 19 increased by 30% over that same time period, 2007 to 2015, and that's looking at data from 1975 to 2015. The suicide rate for teen girls was lower than for teen boys, but also followed a similar pattern, increasing, then declining, then sharply spiking again by 2015. And one of the news reports that I know we have shared on our webpage, cpyu.org, is that the CDC last year found that, they expressed concern over the suicide rate increase in young women ages 10 to 14. And they're saying, keep an eye on that demographic. So it's even kids younger than the kids who are coming to our youth group. These are kids who are in our Awana programs, in our elementary school-aged programs and groups in our church, in our Sunday school classes. It's not just youth group kids. So diligence, awareness is important, and that's what we're going to talk about with Marv.
And I'll just share this, just as from my own history, having done work in the schools for, almost 15 years. It's probably even been longer, but it's not uncommon for me now to go into any one school and to have 1, 2, maybe 3 suicides, depending on what time of the year it is. There's one school that we go into, and they've already had 4 suicides this year. That was a high school that 5 years ago, hadn't had one. They would talk about other schools, other high schools in other parts of our region that had that experience. But now it's not uncommon for many of the principals and teachers to know students, to have had students in their classroom. It's very real, and I think that this is a timely and needed conversation.
Yeah, sadly, this is a conversation we need to have. So let's take a break. We'll come back, and we'll bring Marv in and have a conversation about kids and suicide. Stick with us. Are you interested in bringing CPYU to your church, school, or community? A big part of our ministry is the on-site seminars we conduct in dozens of settings every year. CPYU seminars are designed to encourage and educate your audience on a variety of youth culture issues. Every seminar is designed to be informative, practical, and hope-filled. If you want to learn more about our CPYU seminars, available speakers, and the many seminar topics and options in our growing seminar lineup, go to our CPYU homepage at cpyu.org. Click on the seminar option on the menu bar at the top of the page, and you can learn more about how to schedule a CPYU speaker and seminar for your parents, youth workers, and educators. Well, welcome back, everybody, to this episode of Youth Culture Matters, and we are going to talk today about a sobering topic. This is one of the difficulties of life in a broken world, in a hurting world, and kids and suicide. We've talked about this before. Those of us who have been in youth ministry for a long time have had to deal with it at several levels, and I know that as I track with some of the online, youth ministry forums that are on Facebook, some of those groups that are out there, from time to time, far too often, we see posts where somebody who's working in a local church, a youth worker, is lamenting the fact, last night I lost a kid, I lost a girl, I lost a guy, and then they ask for prayer, they ask for help. So I'm really excited to welcome in my good buddy Marv Penner. Marv's in Canada right now, and where he lives in Kelowna in British Columbia. Marv is on associate staff with us here at CPYU, and one of the fun things, it's fun because we get to minister to parents and to youth workers, is we do a day-long training seminar together called Tackling the Tough Stuff. Marv does a session on teens and depression and suicide. We're going to talk a little bit about some of that content in our podcast today. And then Marv is also involved in working with our other good buddy, Rich Van Pelt, on a day-long seminar they do that's difficult but hope-filled, called Hope and Healing for Broken Kids, and they talk about depression and suicide there. So, Marv, if you're in youth ministry, you've seen Marv around for years. And one of the things you've got to understand is with all those years comes great wisdom. Marv's a counselor. Marv's worked with kids for years. He's been a professor. He's still a professor. And I guess the big thing you're doing now, Marv, that you're most excited about, besides training youth workers and speaking to parents, is the Coalition for Youth Ministry Excellence. Before we start to talk about kids and suicide, talk a little bit about that, because this has been a dream of yours for a while, and you guys have been working on this, and it's launching.
It is launching in the fall of 2018. We're very excited about offering an innovative and unusual way to train youth workers over the long haul. It's kind of an uncollege approach in the sense that it's based entirely on an apprenticeship environment where aspiring youth workers will be placed in an apprenticeship role in a ministry, whether it's Young Life, Youth for Christ, a local church, a Christian school. They'll be full-time in ministry. They'll be mentored by someone who has years of experience and wisdom beyond them. They'll be on a spiritual formation journey with a spiritual director who will guide them over the course of the 2 years in terms of heart preparation for ministry. And over the course of those 2 years, there will be 8 one-week intensive courses that will be offered where the whole cohort gets together and sits under the teaching of some of the most significant youth ministry shapers in the world. So it's the best of a classroom experience combined with an innovative apprenticeship experience and a spiritual formation journey that they'll be on. We really think that to do youth ministry in these days requires experiential integration and spiritual formation at the very highest level. And so we're kind of reinventing the whole vocational ministry training process, and pretty excited about plowing some new ground here. Walt, I'm real excited that you're going to be doing a course in youth culture. Duffy is going to be doing something in the area of communication skills. We'll be doing an intensive course on working with hurting kids, talking about thinking theologically about ministry, youth ministry management courses. It's going to be a great experience. So thanks for giving me a chance to talk about that.
Now listen, I zoned out there for a second. I've never done that before with you, have I? I mean, I just zoned out. But did you say when it starts and who can be involved? Because it's not just you're in Canada, but it's not just limited.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, it's this is open to anybody. Our first classes will launch in the fall of 2018. Last week of September, we're starting with a course called Spiritual Formation in Ministry, and we really believe that heart preparation is really the most significant component of readiness to do ministry in these difficult times, as we're going to be discussing today. This is not for the faint of heart. This requires the very best resources that we can gather and a spiritual maturity probably unlike anything we've needed in the past. These are treacherous times, and we need to be prepared at a deep level.
Marv, is there where can people go to get information? Is there a website on this?
It's www.coalitionforministry.com, and we're actually just in the midst of constructing the site. It'll be up and running in a week or so, but there's already a place there where people can register interest, and then we'll be in touch.
Good. Hey, I'm excited about this. You know, I've been up to Canada dozens of times to teach, and for our friends in the U.S., I'm just going to have to say, if you have not been up there to spend time with and rub elbows with youth workers, they are a humble, learned, excellent group of people who do a great job in ministry. So for those of us from the U.S. to be able to sit in a classroom with them, you know, to mix and mingle with them is a great experience. So hopefully they'll rub off on us. Yes, we want Canada to rub off on us. So
the notion of coalition is very Canadian.
Yeah,
we really see this as a collaborative process where local ministries are as missionally involved in the preparation of leaders as the classroom experience is. it really requires the best of all of us to prepare people for that level of ministry.
Yeah, you guys take that coalition approach to the military too, don't you? Relying on us here.
Yeah, we sure do. Thank you for taking good care of us.
Yeah. Well, that used submarine you got from us, that diesel sub, I just laugh about that all the time. I just think about a diesel sub, big puffs of smoke coming up out of the ocean that, you can't see us. You can't see us. I know it doesn't work that way.
Here's the thing. When you're nice to everybody like Canadians are, we don't need a military.
Yeah.
Everybody just loves us, so we're good to go.
Now, normally, this is where I would go. I would say something snarky like, here we go. But the reality is, that's true. That's just so true. It is true. You guys, diffuse everything. It's great,
Which is why you
Tim
guys
coffee.
Which is why you guys sew Canadian flags on your backpacks when you travel, pretending to be us, so that people will be nice to you.
Canadians are onto that?
Yeah. People can't see you right now, Marv, but I see you sitting there with your Roots sweatshirt on, so that's pretty good. I am. That. Yeah, he's got his Roots sweatshirt on. That is a Canadian shirt. And Jason noticed what you have on your cap.
I know. I'm wearing a Penn State hat.
Yeah, that's an honor of us.
Like I said, I'll wear any free hat somebody gives me.
Okay, yeah. So
shout out to my friends in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, free hats. Send free hats. Hey, well, let's get to the topic at hand. We're having fun here.
Yeah,
now let's get serious about something we have to get serious about, and that's the issue of teen depression and suicide. And as we said earlier, Marv, I mean, this is happening way too much. Just paint a little bit of the picture. We won't get into all the statistics, but what does the landscape look like right now?
Well, unfortunately, the landscape is changing, and it's not changing for the better. The most recent statistics that have come out just in the last couple of months are really pretty sobering. There was a period of time in the 90s and early 2000s where we were actually seeing a decline in adolescent suicide. But around 2007, 2008, that trend turned around. And sadly, in the most recent statistics we have since 2007, 2008, the numbers of completed suicides have doubled. It's a terrifying trend when you start to think about the fact that this now represents twice as many young lives lost as we had back, even as recently as 10 years ago. And so with those kinds of trends, we need to once again stop and talk about how we can respond, how we can be a little more alert to seeing things coming, and if we have the opportunity to interact with a student who is actually seriously suicidal in their thinking, what are the steps that we take to make sure that they get the best care that they can get?
Wow. Is there anything? Yeah. Can I just say something here quick, Jason? I knew you were going to switch gears, but we were talking when we were not recording about some of the, in the last 10 years, some of the issues that have arisen in youth culture that were not present prior to that, and how maybe that's played into it. What are some of those things that?
Well, there's no question that anybody who's processing these statistics is looking to the correlation between the rise of social media and the increase in despair, depression, anxiety that seems to be linked to this new online life that kids are living, where responses are instant and often completely disproportionate. So it used to be, before social media, that if somebody at school hated you, they would know that, and you would know that, and a few of their closest friends would know that. Now, if someone hates you, the whole school can know about it in 10 seconds. And so when kids are targeted, the scope of that targeting has become so enormous that a lot of kids are finding that to be absolutely overwhelming. And I know that you do lots of work with social media, Walt, and that's not what we want to talk about today. But clearly, there's a link that we can't ignore.
Yeah, and I'll just say this, that I haven't seen statistics on this. I haven't gone digging very deeply on this, but I'm sure we'll see something soon. You know, Jean Twenge at San Diego State University is writing about this in her book iGen. She writes about just what you mentioned, but it's filtering down that whole idea of age compression, where these pressures that teenagers used to feel, now kids at younger and younger ages, elementary school, perhaps even younger, are feeling because of social media and their involvement in it. This is where parents need to step up and need to exercise some good common sense. Why in the world are we letting our kids on these things at younger and younger ages, and even putting smartphones in their hands? As you know, I blogged on this the other day. One pastor I know says to his congregation, you know, parents, what would possess you to put a live hand grenade in the hands of your kids? And it's not that these things are bad. They can be terribly destructive. Kids don't know how to use this. And I think, you know, you're right on with this, with the social media thing.
Yeah, it's certainly a trend that we need to be mindful of and speaking to. I think parents, unfortunately, very often feel massive pressure from their kids. There are a number of movements that have emerged now. One of them, and I just forget the actual slogan that they're using, but basically what they're saying is wait until 8. And it's 8th grade. They're saying, let's not put phones in the hands of our kids until at least 8th grade. And what they're actually doing is getting parents and communities to all get together on this. And so when they've got 20 parents from one grade level in a school that all agree we're not going to give our kids smartphones until 8th grade, then there's a little bit of strength in numbers. Then kids can't be playing the card, well, everybody else has one. And so there's a few of these movements that are pretty proactive, and I think really they're going to be helpful. What struck me as interesting was when I saw this thing being covered on the news, the news anchors were kind of saying, can you believe someone would be so radical as to withhold a smartphone from their kid until they were 13? What radical parenting that would be. And then they did the story on the movement. It's a little sobering to think that keeping a smartphone from your kid until 13 is considered radical parenting.
Right.
I think it's wise parenting.
The new translation of that will be, responsible or common sense. That's
right.
That's what that is. Jason, go ahead. I interrupted you, and you had a
no. Well,
question.
These are exactly the questions I wanted to ask. But let me ask this, just turning the corner a little bit and asking a little bit around with this topic around depression and suicide. There are so many misunderstandings and myths, and so I would love to hear from you what some of those might be, because just like social media blows things up in ways that we never have seen before, the scope of it becomes much broader. The weight of these issues becomes much heavier. What are some of the things that we might hear or see in the news that really perpetuate misunderstandings or myths that are a part of this?
Well, I think the biggest myth around adolescent suicide is the idea that kids who attempt or complete a suicide actually want to die. That this is about them wanting to die. Actually, when you're dealing with kids who are thinking suicide or acting suicidally, the truth of the matter is that they are desiring some sort of an outcome which they believe can only be accomplished through ending their lives. So death is not the outcome that they're looking for. Death is the means to an outcome that they're looking for. I'm not trying to split hairs or get kind of weird semantics going here, but the truth is that when kids take their lives, it usually is to accomplish some purpose, and in most cases, it's to make the pain stop. So for most adolescents who end their lives, it's the ultimate expression of pain management. It's a way to make the pain go away. And when you begin to think about what it is that kids are trying to accomplish through their suicidal actions, it gives us the key to intervention. Because in most cases, the outcome that they are desiring is a legitimate outcome. When you're in pain, when you dread going to school every day because it's just going to be one more experience of being targeted by, a mob of kids, when you can't go home because going home is just too scary, too painful, too dangerous a place to go, when you can't be alone with your thoughts because those thoughts are overwhelming and crippling, and you want all of that to stop, obviously, that desire to have all that pain stop is a legitimate human desire. So when it comes to intervention, if there's a way for us to accomplish, with these students, that same outcome in a way that doesn't require them to end their lives, that's the way we need to be thinking. Can we validate this desire they have to make their pain stop? Who wants to live in pain all their lives? Of course, we can validate that. But then to say, is there another way for us to achieve that outcome? And the same would go for any of the other sort of motivations for suicide, getting revenge on someone, or some of the other common motivations that are there. Once we can figure out why you're doing this, then we can begin to explore alternatives. Because at the end of the day, suicide is essentially a strategy for people who feel like it's their only option that's left.
You talked about ending pain, Marv, and you talked a little bit about, the peer group friendships, bullying. We could talk about that. Are there any other sources that tend to be at the top of the heap in terms of when you listen to kids who are contemplating suicide or in the midst of depression? What are some of the other sources of pain that are out there? Just off the top of your head.
I do think that anytime someone is trying to escape what they believe to be an impossible situation, whether that's to avoid punishment. I read a newspaper article recently about a kid whose mom caught her smoking, and she said, your dad's going to deal with this when he gets home. And she ended up taking her life to avoid the confrontation with her dad, a tragic kind of situation. The motivation may be to avoid being a burden. I was in a suicide intervention training course at one point, and the facilitator read a note from a 12-year-old who had taken his life. He was the fourth or the oldest of four children, and his suicide note simply read, maybe there'll be enough milk for the little ones now. So to avoid being a burden, maybe, to be a martyr, and we better be prepared for more of that happening, given some of the trends that we're seeing. There's reasons why people do this. It's not to die. It's to achieve some other outcome. And once we can discern what the outcome is that they're desiring, then we can begin to explore alternatives. Is there another way to achieve that? Maybe the situation isn't as impossible as you perceive it to be, and we can find another path out of this that will allow you to stay alive.
Are there? I'm just really wondering if there are tip-offs with any of this. So, as we look at, you share a simple story of a parent saying, "Wait for your father." I mean, that's one scenario, but there are multiple other scenarios that we're much more familiar with. So, what are some tip-offs that we can be looking for?
Yeah. Well, here's the deal. Many of these tip-offs become much, much clearer in retrospect, unfortunately. And so what we have when we think about the tip-offs or the warning signs that someone may be moving towards suicide, in and of themselves, each of the separate warning signs can be attributed to all sorts of other things. But when you start to put them together, you begin to see how they work together to achieve that point of despair or hopelessness, where ending one's life seems like the only option. Now, let me just say about the issue of warning signs. The reason I want to be careful about how I say this, because I have no desire to be condemning in any way. But the reason that warning signs are missed is because kids are living their lives alone. Very often, parents are so detached from what's going on in the lives of their kids, emotionally and relationally and spiritually, that the kid could be way down the path of hopelessness and despair, and parents could actually be oblivious. And so when we think about tip-offs or warning signs for adolescents, let me just say that the only way this stuff is going to be helpful is if we're actually tracking with our kids. So whether you're listening as a parent today or as a youth worker, a teacher, a coach, the more tuned in you can be to what's going on in the life of an adolescent that you care about, the more likely you are to be able to sense and then respond to some of these warning signs. So, when you hear about things like a dramatic or sudden change in attitude toward life in general, someone who's becoming withdrawn or isolated or pulling away, sudden changes in the use of drugs or alcohol, when you begin to see these things combining, that warrants a conversation. And of course, the conversation has to be based on a relationship, where the student is going to trust the adult who is beginning to inquire, who is beginning to show an interest in what's going on emotionally for them. But if we're tracking with our students, whether you're a small group leader, a mentor, a youth worker, a parent, when we're tracking closely with our students, we're going to notice those changes, and we're going to have the level of trust with that student that will allow us to actually talk about that stuff, to inquire as to what's going on, and to do so in a way that will get a response that will lead to further conversation that can expose some of what's going on. So when you see that trend toward isolation, withdrawal, becoming angry, in ways that the kid never had before, when you see a new interest in other medicating behaviors like use of alcohol, drugs, pornography, those sorts of medicating behaviors, especially when they move toward addictive levels, those are things that we need to be paying attention to.
Mm. Hey, before we take a break, Marv, I've got a question. Daniel Herner, one of our friends, is watching as we record this on Facebook Live, and he's asking, you mentioned youth workers, and he's a youth worker, how would you recommend approaching parents with your concerns about their kids? Thinking of parents who may be in denial or refusing to believe that their kid may be thinking of suicide.
Yeah, I mean, the best way to approach parents is always in a way that involves the student. So I'm always cautious about any kind of interaction with parents that involves going behind their backs. And so what I'd suggest is, if a youth worker sees a student tracking in the wrong direction, and you've got the kind of relationship with that student as a youth worker that allows you to raise some questions and to identify some concerns. When that student, comes clean and says, hey, here's what I'm thinking, then I think the youth worker at that point needs to say, hey, you know what, your parents need to be part of this conversation. And I would love for you and I and your parents to sit down sometime and just talk about some of these concerns that you have. Anytime you can involve the student in the process rather than going behind their back is a huge step forward. And frankly, if a student is seriously talking about taking their own life, we have to figure out a way to pull the parents into the loop on this. This is a time when every resource needs to be mobilized. And unless you're dealing with a highly dysfunctional family where involving parents is clearly going to be a step in the wrong direction, it's important for us to find a way to include them in the conversation. And so to tell a student, hey, we need to involve your parents. Let's all of us get together. I'll be there to support you when you talk about some of these concerns. Because again, behind that suicidal behavior are a bunch of other issues that parents probably need to be actively involved in.
And if the student says, no, I don't want to tell them, then what is the responsibility of the youth worker?
The responsibility when someone's life is in jeopardy is to say, I am willing to put my relationship with this student at risk in order to save their life, if that's necessary. Awesome, you save the relationship and the kid ends up taking their life. What have we gained? There are times when, as youth workers, we need to love kids well enough so that we would be willing to sacrifice our relationship with them for the purpose of saving their lives. When we're dealing with suicide, folks, this is life and death stuff. We don't get a do-over if we make the wrong judgment call on this. Sometimes the kid's going to rant and pout and threaten that they won't be our friend anymore. But honestly, in 40 plus years of working with kids, I've endured those rants on a number of different occasions, and honestly, I have never ultimately lost a relationship with a kid over loving them this well.
Yeah.
Eventually, they circle back and go, "Hey, you did what you had to. I understand."
Yeah, this is good. That's a good word. Hey, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we want to get even more practical and talk about some of the helpful tools that you've given youth workers and parents that are good tools for understanding and then good tools for intervention. So stick with us. We'll be right back. Yeah.
Just let me just say, there are a couple of other tip-offs or warning signs that we need to talk about. They're so blatant that you couldn't miss them.
Yeah, let's talk about
surprisingly, people often do. So when we come back, let me just talk about the blatant warning signs that we sometimes miss.
Gotcha. That's good. All right, stick with us. We'll be right back. I'm very excited to tell you about a new resource we've just launched here at CPYU. Just Add Parents is a series of ready-to-use parent meetings that feature 3 10-minute video teaching segments, each followed by a time for guided small group discussion. Youth workers, Just Add Parents is perfect for use in your parent meeting or a parent class. The teaching content is not only designed to inform parents regarding pressing cultural issues, but to equip them to respond to these unfolding realities in a gospel-centered, practical manner, all with the goal of helping you help parents lead their children into believing and behaving Christianly in today's rapidly changing culture. Each Just Add Parents meeting includes video teaching segments, PDFs of discussion questions, and other handouts. You can order Just Add Parents as either a download or on a thumb drive. I'm happy to announce that the first installment in the Just Add Parents parent meeting series is now available, and it's titled Tech Sensible Parenting. If you want to help your parents understand and respond proactively to kids and technology with a Just Add Parents parent meeting, you can learn more on our website at cpyu.org.
Welcome back to Youth Culture Matters. We're here talking to Marv Penner, and we want to continue the conversation around depression and suicide. And one of the things that you brought up, Marv, right before our break was tip-offs that would be blatant. So I want to hear from you real quick on some of the tip-offs that are just blatant and that we didn't get a chance to get to before the break.
Yeah, certainly. A number of things, including getting rid of your prized possessions. So when you start giving away your stuff, hey, you can have my Apple Watch. You can have my gaming system. Giving away stuff. And closely related to that, making a will. If a parent were ever to stumble across something in a kid's journal or on their desk where they'd written down who gets their stuff if they die. That's pretty blatant. When you start to see kids completely preoccupied with themes of morbidity, when you see them writing poetry, when you see them drawing pictures of tombstones and bloody daggers and those sorts of things, a preoccupation with themes of death. Obviously, if you find the means for suicide being collected or hoarded, you see a collection of pills gathering in a kid's sock drawer, or the most blatant of all is when kids will talk about taking their life. They'll say things like, "Nobody'd miss me if I was gone," or "The world would be a better place without me," or "Maybe it's time for me to just pull the plug," or that kind of language. And I'm astounded at the number of times I'm interacting with people who have lost loved ones who say, "Yeah, they were talking about that, and we just didn't know how to respond." And so let me tell you how to respond. When you see these blatant signs, and even some of the more subtle ones, one of the biggest myths around suicide intervention is that if we ask someone about their suicidal intentions, we may put the idea in their heads. Nothing could be further from the truth. When we see this kind of behavior that is pointing toward a suicidal outcome, the most significant, the most important thing we can do is raise it with the student. "Hey, I can't help but notice a pattern happening in your life here, and it makes me wonder if you're planning to do some harm to yourself. The world would be better off without me. Hey, are you telling me you're thinking about planning to take your life? Or are you talking suicide, buddy?" And again, listen, this only works if you actually have a relationship of mutual trust with a student. But when you see these blatant signs, it's important for you to address them directly, for you to ask the question. And having done that on numerous occasions with teenagers over the course of my ministry life, I've only ever gotten two responses. One is, "Yeah, actually, that's what I'm thinking." The other one is, "No, are you kidding? Wow, do I sound that crazy? No, I'm not thinking that at all." I have never had a kid go, "Well, I hadn't thought about it until this moment, but now that you raise it, maybe I ought to consider that." It doesn't work that way. So once they agree, "Hey, yeah, I have thought about it," now you've got a place where you can start a conversation. And here's where intervention can become the next step. So the first thing you want to do is find out why. What is the outcome that you're hoping to achieve by taking your life? "Well, I can't stand this pain any longer. I can't stand being bullied any longer. I can't go home one more day. It's just too painful or scary." Now you can talk about that outcome and say, "I wonder if there's another way that we could achieve that very legitimate outcome." So even asking questions like, "Why today? Why is today a good day for you to take your life?" It could be somebody's anniversary. I had a kid one time tell me it's my dad's birthday, and I want him to remember every year on his birthday that he pushed me over the edge. So once you begin to get a sense of why, then you can explore options. But there's another really important piece to this, and that is discerning how serious a student actually is about their intentions. There's obviously a whole range of levels of seriousness, and there are some tools that we can use to figure out how serious kids are about their intentions for suicide.
This is your SLAP, the word SLAP?
Yeah, it's a little acrostic, and I've had the opportunity to teach this acrostic to thousands of students and youth workers It's well known in suicide intervention circles, so this isn't my invention, but something that I certainly want to give people as a tool. So just remember this: if a kid is seriously talking about suicide, you want to slap them. Just get that visual image in your head. You're slapping the kid who's suicidal, and SLAP actually stands for 4 diagnostic questions. And if you can discern the answer to these 4 diagnostic questions, you're going to immediately have a sense of just how urgent the threat that you're dealing with is. So a kid has said, yeah, I'm thinking about this, or a kid has called to say goodbye. However, you've come to the understanding that suicide has now become a viable option for them. The first question you want to ask is the S question. S. How specific is your plan? How specific is your plan? So when you say, how would you do that? If you were going to take your life, how would you go about doing that? You might get a response like, well, there's lots of ways you could do it. I could jump off something high, or I could find a gun, or I could take pills, or I could step in front of a speeding car. There's all sorts of ways you could do it. That's not a very specific plan. If, on the other hand, a kid were to say, I have been hoarding my mom's heart medication, and I know that 10 pills are enough to kill me. My parents are leaving for the weekend, and I'm going to take those pills within an hour after they leave. They're coming back Monday. They'll find me in my bedroom when they come. That's a very specific plan. So specificity is the first thing that you want to explore. Secondly, L, S is for specificity. L is for lethality. Lethality, or there's another L word that might help. How long will it take for the person to die? Lethality means how not only is this a fatal method that they're choosing, but is there any window for intervention? So lethality has to do with is there any way that we could step in and save a person's life even after they had initiated their plan? So lethality, for example, a gunshot is much more lethal than pills, in the sense that if someone accurately places a gunshot, it's over. I hate talking about this stuff. This is so awful. But if a person takes a bottle full of pills, you might have 10 minutes, 12 minutes. If a person tries to bleed out, you might have 4 or 5 minutes to intervene. And when you're doing suicide intervention, time is always your best friend. So is the plan specific? Is it lethal? Is there any window for intervention, even after the plan has been initiated? A is for how available is the method? So a person might have a very specific plan. I'm going to use my dad's gun. Do you have the gun? Well, I just have to get the combination to his gun safe, and then I'll be able to do that. Or I just have to go and get the pills, or I've got to collect them over the next 3 months or whatever. How available is the method? No, the rope is tied around the rafter, or the pills are in my hand, or the gun is under my mattress. That availability immediately raises the urgency dramatically. And then P, unfortunately, P is a word that we don't use very often, so I'm going to translate a little bit, is the proximity of help. How close would some sort of help be? Is this kid up in their bedroom and their parents are down in the family room watching TV, or is this kid out at a secluded place somewhere where there's nobody around? So when I teach students this SLAP method, for P, I usually just say people. Are there any people around? Is there a person who can help them? So P is for people, if you want to simplify this. So S, how specific. L, how lethal. A, how available. And P, are there any people in proximity who can be there to step in, especially if there's any window for intervention? Now, once you've answered that question and you've determined that this is an urgent situation that has to be dealt with immediately, remember, time is your best friend. The longer you can keep that conversation going, if you're texting or on the phone with a kid, the longer you can keep that, the more likely you are to be able to diffuse it, the more opportunity you're going to have to step in and create some alternative solutions for whatever problem it is that's driving this behavior. So buy time, as much time as you can buy. Secondly, try to get physically with the person if you possibly can. And I'll tell you, as a youth worker of many, many years, I have used guilt trips on this one without any shame. I've said things like, hey, buddy, we've had such a great friendship. I can't believe you're going to do this without me getting a chance to say a decent goodbye. Let's just grab one more coffee together. And we can, at least I can look into your eyes one more time and tell you that I love you. Whatever you need to do to get physically with the person, because once you're physically there, you're going to be in a better position to help. The third thing is, if you can gain control of the method. So if you can get them to hand you the pills, or if you can get them to hand you the gun, or if you can get them to unload, again, it just, even as I'm saying these words, it wrenches my heart that we're talking about this stuff, Walt.
Yeah.
But these are the realities. I mean, when you think about the number of kids who choose to opt for this. So anyway, you're buying time. You're trying to get physically with the person if you possibly can, or getting someone else physically with them if you can. You gain control of the method in whatever way you possibly can, of course, without putting yourself in danger. That goes without saying, hopefully. And then once you have gained control of the method, then what you do is you begin to explore resources that can come in to help. Remember, kids who are suicidal don't want to die. They want to change their circumstances in some way. They want to send a message in some way. The suicide is just a means to an end. And if we can identify what that end is and try to achieve that end in other ways, now getting them to medical help becomes crucial. Take a kid directly to an emergency room if you have the opportunity. They have resources there to keep kids safe and help them sort things out. What we found is that the first 24 hours, a person who has been actively suicidal should never be left alone for 1 second. We need to stay with them. And then the next window is 7 days. They need to be carefully supervised for 7 days. 30 days seems to be the next window. And the statistical reality is that if we can get kids to 30 days and stabilized, the chances of them returning to suicidal behavior is dramatically reduced. So there you go. Sorry for that long rant, Walt.
No,
I know I haven't given you
Great.
much of a chance to step in, but I know that our time is precious, and I just wanted to get all that stuff in if I could.
Yeah.
Is that helpful?
Oh, yeah. Let me ask one more question here. I mean, this is really good, and I know, Marv, you're a wealth of information, and we're really just scratching the surface, and we're going to give people some resources to go to here in a minute. But, one of the things that I think about when you and I are with youth workers all the time, and you're talking about crisis issues or issues that require expertise above and beyond the kind of expertise we have, because we're very limited, is to see ourselves honestly as people who look for the signs. We act in crisis intervention, and what that means is we don't become the counselor. We become the person that connects the dots between the young person and the family with great need and the person who is professionally trained to offer the help and assistance that's needed. So don't overestimate. Do you want to say anything to that, Marv? Just don't overestimate your abilities.
Yeah, the reality is that kids will share their deepest stories with the person they trust. And that's where, as small group leaders, youth workers, very often as a non-parental adult in the life of a student, we become that first point of contact. But as you say, Walt, we are not the solution. What our job is then to connect them with someone who can deal with the depth of whatever the motivation is, whether it's pain, revenge, anger, whatever it is, someone who's professionally trained to do that, but recognizing that because of the relationship of trust that we have with that student, that once we've referred them to someone who can now help them professionally, we move into that role of support, encouragement, cheerleader, continuing to love that kid well. The fact that we've referred them on to a professional does not mean that we now step back and disengage. They still need our support, our encouragement, and we need to continue to push them toward that professional help to make sure they follow through and finish up the work that they've started. And in doing that, we literally become lifesavers.
Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, just if my own story is any indication of what the stories of most youth workers are, and I've heard older youth workers talk about this, when we are younger, we actually think we can do a lot more than we can. And what wisdom leads to as we get older is not an ability to do more, but a greater understanding of the fact that I probably need to do less here and really serve as that dot connector, so know your limits and really work to know your limits.
Now, here's just one more practical piece then for both parents and youth. First of all, can I say something to parents?
Sure.
If you have an adolescent who is struggling, and I work as a licensed counselor, there is no shame in asking for help. I am astounded at the number of families who, for the sake of avoiding the shame or stigma of asking for help, let things deteriorate to the point where it becomes almost impossible to unravel them when finally they have to ask for help. So parents, if you feel like there's a problem, don't let shame keep you from finding the help for your young son or daughter and for your family, please. So there's no shame in this. So look for the help that you need to get. Maybe I'll just leave it at that for now.
Yeah, that's good. So we've had questions about resources. Where can people go to learn more? What are some helpful books? Let me mention a couple, and Marv, you be thinking, if there's anything else you'd add to this. And we'll include, if you go to the podcast page at the homepage, cpyu.org, click on the podcast, as we do with all the podcasts. Beneath this, the player for this episode, we'll have links to everything that's mentioned. One of the things we'll do, and I worked on this morning, Chris, as we're recording this, is we've got a handout we'll put up on the signs, kinds of things to look for, signs and signals that we need to look for. So we'll have that. We'll also include some links to some websites that are helpful, but some books I'll mention very quickly. Marv has a couple of books that are very helpful. Help My Kids Are Hurting, and we'll include a link to that, as well as Hope and Healing for Kids Who Cut. Our good buddy Rich Van Pelt has co-authored with Jim Hancock a couple of books, The Youth Worker's Guide to Helping Teens in Crisis and The Parent's Guide to Helping Teens in Crisis. Both very helpful. Youth workers, you need to have them at arm's length. One other book I'll mention that I'm a fan of is Karen Mason, who is a counselor and a counseling professor at Gordon Conwell Seminary, has written a book called Preventing Suicide. So we'll include a link to that as well. Marv, what else would you add to this?
Yeah, just those are all great resources, and I wish we had time today to have talked more about prevention. By providing strong community for students, by providing great resources for parents to help strengthen families, we take enormous steps toward prevention. We talked about intervention mostly today when things have gotten to a crisis point, but prevention is where this whole thing needs to begin. I would also recommend Chap's books, Hurt 2.0 particularly, because it deals with some of the underlying issues that push students to a place of despair. I think that would be really helpful. And then just one more resource tip that I would give youth workers is if you can be aware of the immediate resources that are available in your community. So make sure that you've got a counselor you trust on speed dial. Because when you find yourself facing a thing like this, you don't have a lot of time to build your resource team. Have these people in your corner before you need them, so that when you have to make that call and say, hey, I need to bring a student over, you've already got a relationship there. I think that's a really important resource tip that we need to add to the conversation.
So I'm drawing a blank here. I'm just going to mention that this topic is certainly timely because it's always been an issue in youth culture, continues to be such. And as we talked about the stats, we know that. But with the second season of 13 Reasons Why coming out, I'm drawing a blank on when that's happening.
Yep.
This is going to become an issue again that we need to be aware of and we need to be talking about. So, good. Thanks. Jason, any parting words?
I think Marv's last bit there was really important. Being able to partner with those that are in your community, not only having community, but having those that are in your community that are professionally trained. It's one of the most important things. As we've done that here locally, and I've seen it across the country. When you have someone on speed dial that you can trust and know, and who you can even bring into the situation because they've already been spoken to. Hey, we want you to be a part of this process long before it ever happens, because we just need someone who's a partner of our youth ministry, because this will come up. And I think that's one of the most important things you can have, because it's a tool that you're going to need far beyond depression and suicide. There are other things that are going to come up in your youth ministry that you're going to need a professional. So having that on speed dial is going to be really important.
That's a good word.
Right.
Go ahead.
Walt, I was just going to say, and I know you talked about tackling the tough stuff at the beginning of the day, or at the beginning of the podcast, but if we can come in and train people in your community to be part of a collaborative team to support young people, that would be huge.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. That's a full one-day seminar Marv and I do together. It's intense, it's intentional, and it's helpful. And I always say, I am amazed when you talk about pain and heartache. When we're at those things and we're talking, we're each doing a session, that's an hour and 15 minutes long. When that session is over and we're handing off the baton, back and forth as we tag team with our teaching at that, it is amazing to me, troubling to me, the number of parents who line up with specific questions that just, each one like a punch in the gut.
Heartbreaking.
The difficult stuff people are dealing with. So youth workers, bring it to your community. Our intent was not to do a commercial for this, but I think it's good to pass that on. Jason, whenever we have Marv on, you and I do very little talking. I love it.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying that as a wonderful thing because you're such a wealth of information. We just want to let you go, Marv. And so thanks for taking the time today to do this with us. We're going to have you back on soon. And, every time we talk, it's like, okay, what can we get Marv on for next? And it's just great to hear your wisdom. So thanks, Marv.
My pleasure. Love you guys. Thanks so much for what you're doing. This podcast is such a huge gift to youth workers and parents everywhere. Thanks for taking the time to do it.
Thanks. And thanks, Jason. And say thank you to everybody who's joined us, and we will talk to you next time on the next episode of Youth Culture Matters.
Thanks for joining us for Youth Culture Matters, a podcast from the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding. If you'd like to learn more about today's youth culture, visit our website at cpyu.org. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, email us at podcast@cpyu.org.